afternoon, gorgeous weather today. So, perfect weather, especially since the freezing weather we had earlier this week, so it's nice to get out and about. But I appreciate you all spending your Sunday afternoon here. We have phenomenal speakers here that I'm excited for you all to hear their stories and hear what they have to present to you all today. So first and foremost, I want to give you all a quick update regarding redistricting. So as you all know, the Maryland Democrat legislature in the General Assembly, they passed heavily gerrymandered districts for a congressional seat, and same thing with the legislators as well in the state. And a judge struck that down 2 Fridays ago. Gave them 5 days to produce. Good. So the judge gave them 5 days to produce a new map, and they did. But they did it without taking any input from the Republicans, with independents, from the public. And they produced that, and they voted, and they passed it, the House and the Senate, this past Wednesday. So it's sitting waiting to see for the governor to sign it. But I know that the map that the judge struck down, they are appealing that. So pending the appeal status of the map that was struck down will determine if they go with this other one or not. But the map that they did pass, it takes us from our seat from 74% registered Democrats down to 61% registered Democrats. So we get a huge swing coming our way. And on top of that, you take a look at the inroads that we made in 2020. We didn't win, but we made a lot of inroads with minimal outreach because of COVID, so we couldn't go to churches, we couldn't go to big events. And we saw that we flipped 9 precincts throughout the district in 2020. We flipped Accokeek, Maryland, and got a plus 13% gain compared to the election before. So, we also flipped a precinct near here. It's not in the Red Bay, but it's near here. It's in Leonardtown. We flipped a precinct here in St. Mary's County and had a plus 23% gain compared to the election before. So what that says is a couple things. One, the message is resonating. With as divided as our nation seems to be right now, we can unite everyone under the banner of liberty. And that's a great focus point because we know our friends on the left and friends who typically don't vote with somebody with the R next to their name. That's something that resonates with them so much more today. You take a look at all the issues that's happening now, from our schools, from securing the border to energy independence with our country. You're taking a look at government accountability and reckless spending of our taxpayer dollars. These are issues that hit people home, and the same individuals who were hurting before the pandemic with their money in their pockets and their wallets for spending, how are they doing right now with inflation the way it is? And yet the same individuals up on Capitol Hill and through political seats who claim they're for the poor and the impoverished, are they helping them? They aren't. They're making things worse with a tax, spend agenda. So I'm not sure if you heard too, so recently they said, 2 weeks ago when they passed the omnibus bill, they snuck in there a 21% raise for congressional staffers in their offices. So they covered their own selves during the height of inflation, and it's not even at its worst yet, unfortunately. But they're protecting themselves where they're doing for you all that much. So what's their solution that they came about last week? They want to give gas stimulus to everybody. And they want to print more money. What do they think that's going to do? It's going to cause more inflation, yet again. So, but anyway, needless to say, I have a couple of phenomenal speakers here today. So Andres, I met him last year at a Young Americans for Liberty event in Orlando. It's called Revolution. It was a phenomenal event. Andre spoke, and I was just captivated, just amazed just hearing his story. So Andres Galarte is a political activist for the freedom of Venezuela. Only a few years ago, he was a university student studying international relations at the Central University of Venezuela. And on top of exams, typical college student concerns, Andres' studies were interrupted, and we'll go into a little bit more too. I don't want to give it away because it's mind-blowing. By government officials who targeted students on campus for exercising their freedoms. He spent his college years advocating for his fellow students and fighting back against the rise of tyranny and erosion of freedoms. In early 2019, he left Venezuela to intern with the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. And today he has been touring throughout the United States on behalf of the Fund for American Studies and sharing his story with lead students across the nation. And we also have Simone Molino Herrera, who I've had the privilege of meeting him last year too, so we met many events. So Simone, he's a senior at the University of Maryland. He's a human rights and pro-freedom activist And same with him, since coming to the United States, he has been working hard to warn American college students about the dangers of socialism and giving tangible solutions that can prevent a socialist tyranny that he experienced in his home country as well. So, needless to say, welcome.
So hello everyone, thank you so much first to Chris to invite me to this event with my friends Simone and Jose. I've been a resident from Maryland since I arrived to the US. I arrived straight up to College Park, living in College Park, right now I live in Capitol Heights. I've been to 25, 26 states around the country, giving this presentation to different universities, communities, institutions, and I still believe Maryland is the best state in the country. I really like this state, but that doesn't mean that it can't be better. And let me tell you what struck about Chris when I met him last year in Orlando. There was hundreds of people in the crowd, but Chris not only was running for Congress, but he was one of the only people that had Venezuela in the history of our country in the back of his mind. And many of you may wonder, why is Venezuela important to the US elections, to Congress elections? It is really important once you understand, first, that human nature doesn't change depending on the country. It is the same all across the world. And we're facing a war against some people that try to believe that they can change human nature. Something that has been done, never in human history. And the second part is that it's the same script. The same script that was used in Venezuela, it was used in Cuba, it's being used right now in Peru, in Chile, it was used in China, it's used in Russia, it's used in everywhere. So let me tell you exactly what is going on in Venezuela. And maybe you remember what happened in the last year, that there was some things in the news. You're going to remember a little bit about that. In a second.
Breaking news in our world in Venezuela may be on the brink of no return right.
Hold on, internet. Sorry.
Yeah.
This is what it's come to in Venezuela. Emergency surgery by flashlight.
A massive shortage of food and aid in the country is leaving thousands of Venezuelans literally fighting for their life.
That was enough of what you can see what happened in Venezuela. And you may maybe some things that you saw in the video might struck you as similar. Empty shelves in the supermarket, maybe not getting a flashlight using in a surgery, because that happens in Venezuela. In Venezuela there is no electricity sometimes in the country. For example, I had to get used when I was living in Venezuela to not have electricity at least 5 days a week constantly for months, not having running water for constant over the months. So if you have something that you need surgery in a hospital, they're going to use flashlights to operate. In some cases, there were some people that had to use flashlights directly from motorbikes. And that's the kind of things that you see in these videos. And it's one of the main reasons why Venezuela was all over the news 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and it still should be in the news because the situation hasn't changed. It's one of the main reasons why we also have the biggest migration crisis in the Western Hemisphere until just a few weeks ago when the new Ukrainian war started happening. And now we have it's probably going to reach over the levels of what we have in Venezuela. We have 6 million Venezuelans that have left the country since 2017. And if you see the numbers in Ukraine, they keep rising and rising and rising. Because these kind of people, the people behind why people are leaving their country, is what we have to fight against. We have Venezuelans, you know, as myself and as my friends, trying to escape whatever we can. People walking from the weeks to Venezuela, to Chile, to Argentina, even people who had made all the way to the US southern border. Let me just quickly understand this. I'm talking about people, that they were normal people in Venezuela. And from one day to another, they have to tell their sons and everything, just pick your favorite toy. You know, your favorite pair of shoes, because we're just living. Where are we living at? We don't know. We're just going to start walking, and everywhere we can, just to find some opportunity so we can be someone. That's what people are escaping in Venezuela. There is an old saying in politics, that when people can't change government by their vote, they change it by walking. They change vote by their feet. And that's what summarized the migration crisis in Venezuela, in Cuba, and especially right now in Peru. Now, I was born in Caracas. Caracas is the capital of the country. You know, leaving aside everything that is going on, it's a beautiful city. I was born in Petare. In that building you see right there, I spent my whole life with 24 years. And Petare is one of the most dangerous districts in Latin America in the world. It's the biggest district in Latin America. We're talking about millions and millions of people living in that kind of constructions. Now, they're terrible constructions, but that's the way they have to live in Venezuela because there is not enough infrastructure to keep people in safer places, and when you have to find whatever you can to. Growing up in these kind of places, you have to learn things that no child should learn, that you have a shooting every single night. I'm not talking about normal shooting if there's something like that with handguns. I'm not talking about gangs that have more firepower than the police officers and the military. Those are the kinds of contexts that you have to grow up in Venezuela. I was able to go to the biggest university in the country, the Central University of Venezuela, where I studied 4 years international relations. And let me tell you something, before I entered college, when I was in high school, I used to call myself a socialist. Because that's how you're being taught in Venezuela since you are in the primary levels of education. You're being taught that Chavez, Hugo Chavez, the late Venezuelan president, he's the greatest guy that can ever live in the world. That he was bigger than Jesus. There was even a prayer that was changing the name of Jesus for Chavez. He can tell you that socialism is the greatest idea in the world because you are renouncing to whatever you want to be in the favor of the collective. You're renouncing your dreams and whatever you want to be in the favor of the motherland. The same speech that they use in Russia, the same speech that they use in China, the same speech that they're using in Venezuela and Cuba. But when I entered college and I started meeting different people, I met Jose in college. He studied the same career than I did. You start realizing that there is different perspective out there, different people, different backgrounds, different things that show you that there is a world beyond what you're being told by the media, beyond what you're being taught by the people in your community, beyond what you're being taught by your teachers, just like I was in high school. And that might sound familiar to many of you. Many of you may have sons and daughters in high school, and maybe it's the opposite, that in high school they are not being taught as socialism, but when they enter college, they're being taught that socialism is right. But it's the same script. When you're studying Venezuela, it's not like you're here in the US that you have to worry only about deadlines of exams, reading books and that kind of things. You also have to worry that you have to go out and protest against the regime in Venezuela. Because they're literally throwing tear gas bombs inside your classrooms. You're studying like every single day, and there is a tear gas that enters your classroom because they hate students that they don't think like they want you to think. You can see me in the middle picture, holding the flag of the university. Actually, Jose, isn't that you? I think that's you. I really realized. So you can see me in the middle with the green scarf, and in the right holding the flag of the university. We were voting every single one of these protests. It's like you had a part-time job. You suddenly had to stop what you were doing as a student, and you had to go out to the streets, be in the front. Since I was the president of my student government, I was one of the ones that had to organize who was in the front, in the back, who was carrying the banners. So when you have to run back, you know where to run, you have to see the banners. Who was carrying the medical equipment, I had to carry helmets, the sprays that you have to face. That's something that no student has to do. I mean, you're supposed to just study, graduate, and find whatever your meaning is in life. You don't have to give up everything just to try to get some freedom. Or maybe you don't even get that. That number you see right there, 238 political prisoners. That's the current number of people that are in prison in Venezuela because they don't think exactly like the government wants you to think. We could have been one of those because when you're protesting in Venezuela, if they see you carrying a backpack or they just see you in the protest, they will pick you up. If you look like a student, let me see your books. Or you're reading this, or you're reading Marx, that's amazing, keep walking. Or you're reading Hayek, you're reading Mises. Oh, you're from this school, or you're this part of this organization. And they will be like this, you're a terrorist. We were basically called terrorists. We were basically called that we're committing crimes against the motherland because we didn't want to keep doing what the government was saying. And every single one of those political prisoners, they're being faced with unimaginable kind of torture. There is no due process for these people. There is no law that's going to help them. There is no lawyer. There is nothing. You're basically kidnapped by the government. A single case. There is a Navy officer 2 years ago that he tried to do something against the government, trying to use arms against it. And when they captured the guy, they mutilated his dog. He was allowed a golden retriever because the video also went online. They mutilated his dog and they showed the video to the guy so they will break his mind. And once that was over, they then hang him up from his knees until he was completely passed out, only because he spoke against the government. And that's a Navy officer. There is many, many other stories of students just like us that they have to face those kind of things. So they try to keep away from the street, but that didn't stop us. And this is an actual example of the biggest protest in Venezuelan history. When the video can take off. So you can picture what I'm talking about. That's the biggest protest in Venezuelan history. I'm talking about millions, literally Because when you're in that kind of positions, you tend to not think too straight. It's like, what do? Do I face the guys with full riot gear, then go into prison, or you die? Do I try to find another way? And there is usually not many ways that you can escape these kind of situations. Because not only you're facing the military and the police officers, you're also facing your neighbors. You know, the people that live in the same community that you do. I used to live in you saw the building where I used to live. There is some people, the collectivos, maybe you heard that word. These guys, and ladies too, because they also form part of these groups, they work in every single district, and depending on the size of the district, they have bigger units. The guy with the white shirt, he's the head of this collectivo, and he sells vegetables in the same street where I live. So he lives just 1 block away from me. Some of these guys in the middle, they went to high school with me. And all this group, they're called peace crews by the army, because they're in charge of keeping peace in the street. So no one protests, so no one speaks out. If you're walking and these guys hear that you're saying something bad about the president, about Maduro, they're gonna pick you up. They're gonna take, because they know who you are. They're intelligence groups. They know who you are, and you also know them. This picture I took them from the balcony of my house in May of 2017, when we were protesting like it wasn't usual in those years. And these guys show up, started shooting at us. You know, I just run back to the apartment with my family, and they started shooting at our apartments. You know, the adrenaline of knowing that your grandmother, your mother, your sister, everyone is in the same space that they're shooting at is insane, because you never think that that's going to happen to you when you're just out in the street asking for freedom. But they're just doing it, and they made a threat that they will burn down our buildings if we didn't stop protesting, if we didn't stop protesting against the regime, especially the buildings that house the students, because they knew that the students were the one organizing these protests. And this is what awaits any country, that they allow criminals to have more firepower than the police officers, more firepower than the military. Because you might see that this guy only has a handgun, but all these units, they have more power in the place where I live than the police officers and the military. So you don't want to mess up with these guys, because also, they're the ones in charge of the social programs. So the box of food that you get in Venezuela monthly, they are the ones that deliver to your house. So if you are not in good shape with these guys, you don't get food. And that's a situation that people have to face every single day in Venezuela, when you're no longer an individual, and you're whatever the government wants you to be. Now, you know, when I finished college, and many people ask me, how did you get to the US? Just like Chris was saying, I had the opportunity to come here to an internship in the Cato Institute. This picture in the right is the last picture I took with my mom, that when I left the airport in 2019. And you know, I told my mom, I'm just going to an internship in the US, just 3 months, learn something else, a new experience, and then come back to the country. As crazy as that sounds, to come back there. I was a spoiled little child from my mom. So I had to, you know, just experience the US and come back and replan my future. But she started crying a lot that day, because as you know, moms always know better. Yeah, I know it was not. Because only 1 week after I arrived in 12th January 2019, and the 19th, these guys show up in the political space of Venezuela. One white one, maybe you heard that name. And the whole crisis in Venezuela went to a whole new level when he started facing against Maduro. The thing is like, to understand this quickly, this is like the Pelosi in Venezuela, please, not like Pelosi, actually just the office. So he's like the head of the assembly of the Congress in Venezuela, so he had to face against Maduro because we don't recognize Maduro as a president. So everything was going on in Venezuela, and I was doing here the internship. Like I told you, I was not planning to stay here. You remember that I told you there were some colectivos in the neighborhood. The colectivos knew that I was here. So they went to my apartment to my mom, and they knocked the door one day in January, and they told her, hey, where is your son? We haven't seen him in a few weeks. And they did the same in January, and they did the same again in March. And I knew that they knew where I was. My mom knew, and of course they knew. They only wanted to make sure that my mom knew that they also knew. So there is no way, when you're facing that kind of persecution, that going back is an option. Because you either get picked up at the airport, because the government knows what every single activist is doing. Once they know they're coming from the US or from Cato Institute, that's like a terrorist organization labeled by Margir in Venezuela, or you're doing activism in the US. Okay, straight walk, go to that door and stay in that instead for a while. You're going to a dark room and no one will know about you, and you're just going to be another number of the political prisoners. And if you're lucky to leave the airport, they're waiting for you in the neighborhood. The colectivos are waiting for you. Because there is a sense of revenge against any single student that tried to do something in Venezuela. And going back for us is a death threat. And it's also the economic crisis. Right now in the US, there is inflation, the highest numbers we have seen in decades in the US. When you go to the Venezuelan example, we're talking about trillions in inflation. We're talking about people that you try to buy a hamburger today at, I don't know, $7 in the morning, and you try again at night, and now it's $8. Prices change by the hour in Venezuela. We don't have a currency anymore. People need foreign currencies like dollars or the euros or whatever, because we don't have a currency anymore. It's completely devalued. And the minimum wage in Venezuela is less than $5 a month. So you can imagine that people in Venezuela can't afford to live because the prices are international prices. Gasoline is the same price in Venezuela. A pound of meat is the same price here than in Venezuela. So how are you going to buy $10 on a pound of meat with $5 minimum wage a month? That's how, just like Cubans, all Venezuelans that leave the country, we try to send money to our families over there. Because there is no other way that you're going to survive inside without your son sending you money. So these two reasons are the main reasons why people like me, like Simon and Jose, we decide to stay here. Because there's no other way to going back, basically, to die in the hands of the regime. Now, how was Venezuela before all of this? We were always, at the bottom of every single economic index in the world. Actually, we were not. When Venezuela discovered oil in the last century, and I was just speaking that with Maria, we were basically the richest country in Latin America. By 1970, Venezuela was known as the Saudi Venezuela. We were basically Miami, but in Latin America. People will travel to Venezuela. Venezuelans will come here in the weekend, buy something, Miami, come back on Sunday night. Americans go to Venezuela to build businesses. We have immigrants all over the world going to Venezuela. Venezuela was booming. And to speak about an actual example, the one of my mom. My mom, she was born in the mid-60s, and she never finished high school. So she never had any formal education. My sister, the girl like right here, she just gave birth to her daughter last week, so now I'm my uncle. She was born in the mid-80s, and she never knew her father. The only child she's carrying right here, that's me, that I was born in the mid-90s, and I never knew my father either. So my mom was a single mom, 2 childs, no formal education, but the economy of Venezuela of the 70s, 80s, and 90s, she was able to find a pretty good job to maintain everything we needed as a family. Every single thing that I have today is because of the sacrifice of my mom. We were a classic middle-class family. We had, presents under the tree, my favorite toy like Batman. She used to dress me like a rhino that a lot of people think is a unicorn. It was a wonderful child. Everything thanks to my mom. But you have to wonder, what will happen if you're born today in Venezuela with the same circumstances? No father in the house, this economy, and your mom with a formal education. Something like this. Where the average Venezuelan is losing 24 pounds per year. With a single mom, and that's the usual picture, they don't have a way to feed their own sons. When 95% of the population is living in poverty, 76% in extreme poverty. What does extreme poverty mean? That percentage of the population, they can't feed themselves the 2,200 calories per day that they should. So basically, we're talking about 1, maybe 2 generations of malnourished childs that they're going to have a terrible future. And people are literally eating garbage in the street. When I was and I know it's a terrible picture, but I'm the one of the people that believe that we have to see reality by the way they are. This is the same picture that I used to see every day going to college. People making lines in a restaurant, not in the front door, in the back door, because they knew the schedule that they were going to throw the garbage out. So they wanted to be the first in line to eat garbage. And that's terrible, because that's a complete attack on human dignity. I'm talking not about people that they were hopeless. I'm talking about people that were middle class like us. And from one day to another, you lose all your savings because of inflation. You lose everything you have and all the opportunity you have for a future. And you're just trying to find some food in the street. Now, how do we get to that point? How did Venezuela end up being at the bottom of everything in Latin America and the world? Many of them blame to this guy, Hugo Chavez, the late Venezuelan president, a terrible military when you read his biography, but a really charismatic guy. He could sell you whatever he wanted. He had his way with words. But we don't only focus on the problems that he did, because he reached power in 1998. What did the governments do when we were more prosperous? When Venezuela was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s? Because when the times are good, it's when you make the mistakes that make the times go bad. The first mistake is that we started spending like crazy because of the economic boom we had in the 70s and 80s. So the public debt skyrocketed in Venezuela. Well, I don't know what to teach you. You have trillions in debt here in the US. inflation was starting to go up, and this is before Hugo Chavez was in the picture. This is the 80s and in the early 90s. Inflation was starting to go up, and people were not liking that. They were blaming the politicians, blaming the ones in power, blaming the ones that had the wheel in the car. But even that they were blaming, they were also demanding their social benefits, because there was already a culture of dependency starting to be established in Venezuela. That independently of who was in power, you were expecting your boxes of food. You were expecting your benefits from the government. You didn't care who was in power, you just wanted your benefits. And that was starting to happen in the late 90s, and now it's the predominant culture in Venezuela. Now, how did Hugo Chavez reach to power? And that's what worries me the most, not only about the US, but other countries. When you're facing a plethora of problems, like we had in Venezuela in the 90s, inflation, public debt, things that sound familiar to many here in the US, there is always someone that is going to try to do something to say, hey, things are terrible, but I'm the guy that is going to change everything. I'm the Messiah. I'm the savior of what we're going on. That's what Chavez did in 1992. He was just telling everyone that he was going to save the country for the problems we had, and he committed a coup against the government. He failed the coup, but the government said, well, let's give the guy an opportunity. He was released from prison in 1994, but already the whole country knew who Hugo Chavez was. He won the presidency in 1998. And this is the Washington Post. I mean, sometimes you have to look twice to see if actually this is the Washington Post that posted this in 1998, saying that there is a populist elected in Venezuela. Probably Chavez was elected today. They were saying that, you know, the new savior of the human race was being born in Venezuela. It's amazing how the media changed in decades and how they were reporting things like what happened in Venezuela. So what Hugo Chavez did, he didn't say he was a capitalist or a socialist. He never used the word socialist. He only said he was a humanist, that he was a poor person, so he knew the best for the poor people. And people bought that message. You're going to see Hugo Chavez doing something that I hope never happens here in the US, which is just walking towards some street and pointing towards some buildings. And you're going to see exactly what he's asking. He's asking, who owns that building over there? Or that's in public hands. That's amazing. Who owns the other building? That's a private building. Well, that's in private hands. Confiscate that. That's what he's saying. Expropiate in Spanish and English. It's confiscated. And his followers were happy as hell. They were happy that Chavez was just doing what he said was going to do. Attack the elites. Take the money from the millionaires, because being millionaire is bad. But of course, the whole Chavez family is the most millionaire people in Venezuela and probably in Latin America. But they were going against small, medium, and big businesses. There is something that you can see online in YouTube where he literally is in a show, just like in the right picture, and he calls the head of a bank. And he says, you know, I can take your bank right now if I want to. And he signed a paper, and he confiscated the guy's bank. What's scary about that is not the action, but it's the applause from his followers. There were people happy that he was doing that. Like, if you're not going to destroy your country, if you start confiscating people's small and medium businesses, if you start confiscating people's farms and confiscating the means of production of a country. And that was happening in Venezuela. And eventually, that is what destroyed the country. Gaining the means of production. That was socialism. Confiscating everything, destroying the currency, allowing the criminals being rampage in the country. When Hugo Chavez died, he said that Maduro was his successor. So what we've been facing since 2012, the year he died, is a different face, but the same project. The same people doing the same thing. Trying to gain the power in Venezuela by whatever means is necessary and expanding that to the rest of Latin America. That's why Venezuela is so important in the US. Because this is not just a Venezuelan problem, this is a regional problem. Because if Venezuela keeps the way it is, you're going to be having hundreds of thousands of people arrive to the southern border. If Ecuador falls too, if Colombia falls in the next elections that they have in the upcoming months, and the guy that is running in Colombia, he used to be one of the best polls of Hugo Chavez. If he wins, you're going to see more Colombians escaping around the region. And the same with Ecuador, and the same with Argentina. And before you know it, the whole region is try to escape at some point. And that's what we have to avoid. Not people trying to escape, but we have to avoid these people destroying our countries. Because what are we going to have left if we destroy our countries? And that's what we have to avoid to happen here in the US. And to finish, you know, there is always something cliche, like we arrive to the US and, you know, the US is the most wonderful country in the world. And yes, I'm going to repeat it. The US saw when I went to a supermarket was something like this. Hundreds of brands, colors, sizes, smells, and some kind of pepper that do some stuff to you when you use it. That's insane, because in Venezuela, you're used to something like this. When you go to a new supermarket, you see a sign that says 1 per person. So we have a WhatsApp group, whatever kind of group of text messages, and there is someone saying, hey, there is toilet paper arriving tomorrow. So you will have to wake up. I know it's funny, but it's not so funny when you're... It's like you have to wake up the next day at 4 a.m. with your mom, your grandmother, your dog, the cat, someone you met in the street, your sister, and some friend that you call. So everyone will make a line and just hope that you get to the point where you can buy 1 package of toilet paper. One per person. So in the end, if you reach the entrance of the supermarket and there's no more toilet paper, the whole community is going to share a package of toilet paper. That's terrible. Because here in the US, well, for many other reasons that it's terrible. The first reason it's terrible is because you shouldn't be just buying what you want. You should buy whatever you want. Because in a free market like in the US, you have the opportunity to buy, all the toilet papers you have in the picture. That's your thing. You can buy everything that you want. But you can't do that in a socialist country. When the pandemic started, I was in DC, and I went to a supermarket, and they have empty shelves, and I started having flashbacks. I was like, oh my God. I'm going to start, buying just one thing of something, and that day was really depressing. The next day, I went to the same supermarket, and everything was replenished. Why? Because the US has a free market system of private businesses that can react to these kind of situations. We don't have that in Venezuela. We don't have a private business system. We don't have a free market. So when you have a crisis like the pandemic or whatever other crisis, especially the one of socialism, which is an internal crisis, you don't have any means to respond to that. You have that here in the US. And that is why it's so important to fight against any kind of figure that tells you that socialism is a great idea. Because if you follow down that path, maybe you're going to hang to something like this, which I'm doing right now. This is the last picture that I took with my family of Christmas of 2019. And if you don't know too much about the immigration laws, people like us, when we can't go back to our country, it's not that we can't. We have a span of 5-10 years where we can't literally go back to our country. So I know that I won't be seeing my mom in who knows how many other years. Because even if those years pass, who knows if I'm going to be picked up by the regime. If the collectivos in the neighborhood are going to do something. Every single one of them in my family, we have the hope that someday we're going to see each other. But no one should go through that. If you have to leave your family, because I hope it is because you want to make a whole year trip in Asia or something like that. No, because you're being forced to do it. Because in the end, that is socialism. The summarize of socialism is forcing individuals to do things that they don't want to do. Because when you don't have choices, because what were my choices? Going back and being killed or staying here? That's not a choice. So when you realize that you don't have choices, you're no longer a person, you're no longer an individual. You lose your identity. Because what makes us individuals is our power to choose our future. And socialism completely takes that from you. So anyone that just tells you that socialism is great, tell the Venezuelan story. And people like Chris that I know that they have this story in the back of their minds, they are the kind of people that know that we can't have that here in the US, in any kind of level. Because I don't want anyone to pass the same things that we did in Venezuela, and the same thing that my brothers in Cuba did, the same thing that people in China, the same people that people in Russia did. Because our moral duty is to tell the story. And we can just only hope that people listen to it. Thank you so much.
I want to first of all thank Chris for inviting me to here today. And one of the things I realized coming on my way here is the farms. When I see you all, the audience, I think in parents, I think in small business owners, I think in farmers, I think in fishermen, I think about the root of America, the working class, the people. That's why I remember Venezuela used to be a town like that. Used to be a wealthy town of people who, even though you don't have too much in your pocket, you can really thrive on your own. If with a critical amount of effort, you can succeed. But of course, when Chavez came to power, everything went down, out of the roof. You know, gone forever, or your businesses, or your properties, or your everything that you own through your hard work and effort, it was disappeared, and you will never recover financially. So one of the things I remember growing up in Venezuela, I never had a proper life. I never experienced the prosperity. I never had security in my own life. I never witnessed how freedom really works in a nation, in a really wealthy nation. I remember the first times, the moment socialism arrived, and the pandemic, and everyone was speaking about it. Well, the real pandemic here in America, in the world, is socialism, is communism. That's the real pandemic that is attacking the entire Western Hemisphere. It's attacking Venezuela, it's attacking Argentina, Ecuador, Peru. It's a real threat right now. And you know, you never know, and everything starts with just a single vote. Just a single vote to a socialist, and invite them into power. That's how you destroy your entire nation, the entire land. I know that they may promise the utopia, the promised land, as they want to see, as they want to explain. Oh, everything will be better to you, you know, but no, it's pretty much the worst thing that will happen. I remember the first time I realized my country was in a state of chaos was when my mother was kidnapped when I was 5 years old. It was a terrifying thing I ever experienced in my life because I knew that maybe I would never see my mother again. You know, in that moment I realized that we were living in the most insecure country in the Western Hemisphere. The death toll in Caracas is even higher than the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. It gets to that yearly. You know, I remember my first time, before I was coming here to America, I was, you know, doing my own business, my own life, going to a gym, studying, until one day, a few guys in a motorcycle, they grabbed me, and they put me against a wall with a gun. And they told me that, well, you want to breathe on your own again? Give me everything you have. And usually when that happens, they can shoot you anyways. The same with ransom. My mother thankfully came to my house, alive and well, and she's living in Baltimore as a school teacher. But not many families have the same luck. You know? One of the things that I realized as well is that when you live in a socialist tyranny, you don't have freedom of enterprise, you don't have freedom of speech, you don't have freedom of faith, you don't have freedom of movement. As Andres explained many times, Hugo Chavez used to seize and confiscate every single business you have. And once you confiscate everything, they went into bankrupt. They say, oh, we're going to take your business, we're going to take your farms, we're going to take your factories. We're going to control everything from here. But you know, they go to bankrupt, and at the end of the day, there is shortage of food. There is shortage of course, medicine. People making the lines for hours, for 12 hours to find the basic needs. I remember I was with my grandmother before coming here, and pretty much one of the things that I used to do, we used to go to 5 different supermarkets to find the basic needs. And people make lines for just 1 pound of chicken, of beef, 1 gallon of milk, 1 pound of flour, or whatever thing they have, toilet paper, gas, whatever. And it happens in pensions as well. I used to see senior citizens passing out in the lines after waiting for the patient or the medical resources, and they pass out and they even die. The most horrifying thing I ever seen. From, of course, before the wealthiest nation in the world, during the 70s and 80s, it was terrifying. When it comes to freedom of speech, even when you tweet against a regime, they can take you out in a military prison. If you tweet against Maduro, if you tweet against Chavez, if you go to the marches, if you pretty much speak out in the name of freedom, in the name of your country, in the name of your tradition, in the name of your constitution, they can just, later on in the middle of the night, members of the intelligence of the Maduro regime, they can just come to your house and kidnap you. Seize everything you have. you never see your family again, and you get tortured. Really badly. We lost 2 members of the council members of the National Assembly. They got tortured, members of the military got tortured and died in the recent years. They don't even have respect for humanity, for human rights. It's the most horrifying thing. When it comes as well, I mean, and it's not only businesses that they seize, it's your own home. You know, when you travel, that's one of the things that maybe Andres forgot, but when you travel away for vacations or to another parts of the country and you leave your home pretty much in a state like, well, you know that you're going to go back to your home. People in the Maduro regime, they say to their supporters, oh, you need a place to stay? Go to this house right here, break everything, and it's your home now. That's what happens. No matter how secure you put your houses, no matter how well preserved you have your properties, your pretty much your personal belongings, you know, they're just going into your house and take everything. That's it. You come back from your vacation, you have home, you don't have home. It's horrible. I mean, it's a nightmare, what I experienced. And one of the things as well is mobilization. You can mobilize, you can go to marches, but of course, even if you are a civilian, one of the things that happened, and I experienced with my father multiple times, is that we were driving around Caracas. And there is checking points from the military. You are in your car, normally, they just call you, go to this line, please. What you have? What do you have? How much do you have? They stole you. Like pretty much in the name of the Republic, or in the name of the revolution, as they say, in the name of the homeland, as they say, you know, you need to pretty much secure the military, you know, give us something. Give something for the law enforcement. That's what happens on socialism, you know. The military become corrupt, the law enforcement become corrupt, and they're not even military, they're criminals. They're the colectivos. That they just, well, they just change the uniform, and you know, with a badge I can do whatever I want, and I can just pretty much repress the civilians as much as I want. It's horrible. I mean, it's one of the things that is really important when you look into misery is that how can we recover from this? How did we went from this position and on this state of chaos that is socialism? There is of course constant repression, there is a lot of amount of uncertainty, fear. It's a lack of education. You know, back in the 1970s, in the 80s, the vast majority of Venezuelans, they were illiterate. They could not read or write. They were neglected by certain aspects of the country, the population. They did not have state IDs, they did not have access to proper healthcare. So, you know what, they were ignorant. And when you are an ignorant individual, you pretty much live, of course, through your own misbeliefs, you know, your own misery. You fall into your own mistakes and you vote for a socialist that will promise you everything. And Chavez came as a populist, as a demagogue, promising free healthcare, free education, free housing, free food, everything for free. And now, you know what? Now you are more neglected and more poor than you were before, back in the 1970s. Of course, there's other aspect of the population that thrive on their own, and that's the greatest thing ever, but of course, not many people have that chance. One of the things as well that I want to discuss is that how else can we change this, you know? And education is the key thing. You know, when I came to America, and I witnessed the Biden taking over, of course, in the recent years, it reminds me to an old man that we used to have before. In the 1980s, we had Rafael Caldera. He was really old. In his first term, he was the greatest president ever. But in his second term, he was that old, and that's senile, with probably dementia, that he pardoned Chavez. Chavez made the military coup in the 1992, and he pardoned him in exchange of, like, you know, government opposition. So when I see Joe Biden, I see the same mistakes. Highest inflation ever, skyrocketing, supply chain crisis in the southern border. Governmental control, there is no freedom of speech, indoctrination toward children. That's the same thing Chavez did. The first years of his administration, that's what he did. He went to the youth. Because I know that the youth is the future of America. It's the future of our republic. And that's why we need to elect young leaders in the name of liberty who are capable to do the greater things for our republic, for our country. That's why I know that Chris is going to do a heck of a job here in the 1st District of Maryland. Because, you know, he's a family man, he's a coach. He can do whatever he can do to make this country and this district great. Once we get elected in a couple of years. Hopefully. But, you know, one of the things that we need to understand is that don't never underestimate someone who, you know, says, oh, we're going to implement socialism. You will, you know, it's the best system in the world. No, never believe those kind of people. Never trust, not a single dime, not for a single second, because they're going to take everything from you. They're going to throw your livelihoods, everything. So therefore, that's why we need to keep fighting back. By mobilizing, by knocking doors, by petitioning the government, by standing for our beliefs, by standing in groups in civic associations, and keep fighting. The same as we see in London County, against the mass mandates, against the coercion of government. Well, the same we can do for the name of our republic and for our freedoms, because that's the only way we can do it. That's how we can, of course, defeat big government. Defeat socialism by the hands and the majority of the people fighting together, mobilizing, educating ourselves, running for office. I think that's one of the things that we need in Venezuela, and that's how we can restore a republic. A new constitution, a new way to, of course, not improvise, my bad, but to restore the democratic institutions the way they were, the separations of power. You know, one thing, interesting thing, we never had a Second Amendment in our country. We never had a constitutional right to defend ourselves. And because of that, that's why Maduro and Chavez repressed more the population and the youth. Because we were not able to defend ourselves. When the images that you see on the streets, on the highways, we only have carbon bullets. We only have whatever we have in our disposition to defend ourselves, to cover against the tear gases. We grab the tear gases, we throw them back. And I met several of my classmates with their hands totally burned out because of the tear gases. With the equipment that they have once they go back, oh, you know what, I'm going to class and there, you know what, I'm going to these protests, these marches, and I used to do it as well. I see the misery in my own eyes. I see, of course, people, my friends, fighting, suffering, risking their lives for freedom. One of the things I realize is that even if you are a foreigner and you want to visit Venezuela, they're going to assault you in the airport. You look foreigner, you're American, European, give me everything you have. One of the things that the National Guards they do in the airports is that they check your receipt. You have any receipts on you, or they open your bags and they take everything you have in your possession. We cannot even have a wealth tourist industry per se. You cannot even visit your country. People ask me, oh, I want to visit Venezuela. How is it? I mean, it's a beautiful nation. Naturally, when it comes to nature, when it comes to, like, in a certain way, culture. But nowadays, it's not the same. Nowadays, even certain countries in Africa may be thriving on their own a little bit than ours. But that's why, in this election, in America, in the name of the Republic, we need to vote for freedom. We need to vote for the youth. And we're doing it right now. Madison Collin, 25 years old, congressman for the state of North Carolina. Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida. Ted Cruz. All these leaders, all these bold leaders can really change the Republic and the freedom. And that's how we need to do it. And that's what we need to do. To educate our children in a better way. Homeschooling. Educate our education reforms to things that really matter. You want to be a technician? You want to be architecture? You want to be a finance lawyer or a doctor? A businessman? Entrepreneur? Learn the right things in life. Not this critical race theory, gender dysphoria, radical gender theory that they're putting in their children's minds, dividing our nation, dividing among families. You know, family is the greatest thing on earth. And that's how Venezuela, for somehow, us became strong. We have strong family values and faith. In Venezuela nowadays, we cannot have faith. Even if you want to have spiritual guidance, protection, through prayer. The Maduro regime has undertaken to churches and kidnap and trying to assault priests, religious leaders. Some of them are already exiled here in America. You can even have spiritual protection. That's the saddest thing I ever witnessed in my life. The most horrible thing. You cannot pray. This country is based on prayer. It's based on God. In God we trust. And that's the only trust we have. We cannot trust in any governmental official. We only trust in God. We only trust in our families. We only trust in our youth. We only trust in how great this country can be. Because regardless of what happens, I know that it's the greatest country on earth. When I came to America, it was frightening to come to America. Regardless of the crisis that we're living in Venezuela, my parents tell me, you should go to America, it will be a better chance for living. No, I want to stay here. I want to keep going, I want to study international relations. I want to keep changing my country, regardless of if I don't have less opportunities or risk, or if I'm risking my life. But when I came here, I realized that by now becoming an American citizen, I can do the great things ever. And I can, of course, work for the best of the country, for the best of America, for the best of Venezuela, for the best of the Western Hemisphere. Because, it's not like I believe in America first. I believe, of course, in the West first. When you have a strong Western Hemisphere, you have a rich nation. You have a rich America. You have a stronger America. That's what we need, and that's how can we defeat socialism. That's how can we prevent all the dangers and the horrible things that we witness right now. That is in reality, that is getting worse year after year, month after month, day after day. That's how we can win. Electing the right people, hold them accountable, and most importantly, elect people in the local state elections. That's what really matters, school board. Go to the electoral precincts, watch the elections. We want secure elections as well in this country. We didn't have that in Venezuela, never again. So I want to thank all of you, for having me here today, because I know that we're going to do great deeds for our republic. And one day for Venezuela will be free again. And I have my faith that I will serve this country and as well the entire Western Hemisphere. God bless you. God bless Venezuela. God bless the United States of America.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you, Andres. Thank you, Jose, for coming too. But that's why when I heard him speak last year and heard the importance of it, and it's amazing when we met just under a year ago, how much things have changed here in the United States since I first heard him speak. And that's why I wanted to have him come down, because them discussing what they experience, and you see the parallels already just within the short year under the Biden regime. You see how quickly that they are turning our country completely upside down, to where they want to consolidate more and more power to the state and disempower the people and give that more to the state itself. And that's not what this country's founded on. I mean, recently I've been rereading the Federalist Papers and Anti-Federalist Papers, which I think are some of the most important documents, understanding why we are a constitutional republic. And when you take a look and see what's been going on, especially the past couple of years, how the government, for example, legislative branch. You all saw recently too how much money they're pumping and spending, the trillions amount of dollars that the Treasury Department to push. But then even this past December, when they had a discussion about the debt ceiling, what did Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer say that they wanted to do? They wanted to give the Treasury Department, the Department of the Treasury, they wanted to reallocate their own duties inherited them by the Constitution to maintain the purse of the country and give it to the Treasury Department to determine how high the debt can go. You do that, as Andrea said, you have the amount of money that they can continue to pump through. Inflation's going to skyrocket through the roof because they've just delegated their resources. And we see the same thing too when it comes to our Second Amendment rights. How many of them are they writing in these big giant omnibus bills towards the end of your appropriations bills where they're just saying, we're going to spend X amount of dollars to go towards these organizations and they can write policies. They reallocate their resources to the ATF, to other three-letter agencies to therefore create rules out of thin air and they're unelected bureaucrats in the executive who are then now creating laws and hurting our own constituents. And meanwhile, they're circumventing our rights and liberties. So it's been happening substantially quickly over the past, especially 2 years, where we also have we're talking about the freedom of speech. We don't have the freedom of speech. Some countries, that's all they have left. They don't have the power to vote. So they have the power to use their feet, or the power to use their voices as best they could. But then now when you have the Biden administration, the Department of Justice, who were pushed by special interests to tell individual school districts like Loudoun County, where parents have concerns about the curriculum that their kids are learning in a publicly funded school, and they want to say, oh, we want to deem them as terrorists or treat them as terrorists because they're going against what the state says. That is absolutely scary precedent to be taken upon. So that's why, as they said, we need to get, we need to make sure that we have elected officials who respect your individual rights and liberties. Because once they're gone, they're so much harder to get back. So as we're seeing throughout the country. So, so real quick, I'll close it out. So we're going to open up a Q&A. So you all have any questions for them too. But I spoke to a friend of mine recently, and she was born after 2001. And she had a really unique perspective. She said, you know what, my generation growing up, we don't know what things were like before 2011 or 2001, before the attack on September 11th. And it got me really thinking about policies that's been enacted since then. When we take a look at the Patriot Act, I'm a former federal law enforcement police officer. I understand how that helped with streamlining the communications from the federal, state, and local levels for police departments to share information. But it created the TSA, it created NSA, it created a whole bunch of institutions that can go through and have warrantless searches of your individual, your data, and it's been expanded upon since then. And then you take a look at the National Defense Authorization Act in 2012. And it was Senator Carl Levin of Michigan, a Democrat. He was the one who called this out. He said it was the Obama administration who wanted this verbiage in there or else they were going to veto it. And that verbiage was that any Americans that are aiding on the mere suspicion, not probable cause, the mere suspicion of aiding and abetting terrorism can be held without due process. And meanwhile, when that was going on, when they were discussing that, I was working on Capitol Hill. Now, when the Tea Party was having their protests and rallies on Capitol Hill, and I remember Senator Harry Reid discuss those Tea Partiers are acting like terrorists. And when I heard that verbiage, I'm sitting there going, oh, I'm connecting the dots already. How that abuse of power can easily be, portrayed against the people, we the people, later on down the road. And that bothered me ever since. So, but again, it got me thinking about growing up for my friend. She didn't grow up in a life before that where we were much more free. We had much more freedoms, and unfortunately, in the past couple years, we're at the cusp of losing our whole country. So that's why this election is so important. To help out local candidates too. I see Marcus here, I see Stacy, I see Dorothy here too, and we got Tony Potoko running as well, Maryland's 3rd district for Congress. So that's why it's so important. And for me, I've heard it too. I've heard it running here in the 5th district against Steny Hoyer. Oh, it's a tall task to take. Steny has the deep pockets, which he does. But if we're going to just sit back and just let it take over, then we're going to lose everything. So as you all know, I grew up here. I don't want to see it go to the wayside. I don't want to move somewhere else and fight for it there. I want to work for it here, for the people of Maryland, this district. So with that being said, is to take a rising tide to raise all ships. So that's how I'm looking forward to you all, your help, especially taking the wealth of information experience that they unfortunately had to deal with and continue to deal with in their country. Talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors. Be bold, be courageous, because that one act of courageousness can be contagious to where it uplifts everyone else in the community to stand up. Because if we don't, like I said, the freedom that goes to, the freedom that's not exercised goes to apathy and die. We have to fight for our freedom, we have to fight for our liberties. So thank you all so much, and I do want to open up real quick to Q&A. Does anybody have any questions? I'll run around with the mic. I know it's not working though, but I'll kind of be the indicator of who it is. But does anybody have any questions for our guests?
When are you running for office yourselves? Let us know.
Yeah, I mean, some years have to happen. There's many years. but yeah.
I received that offer a lot of times before, And it would be an honor for me to run for office here in America. But you know, my heart is in Venezuela, but one of the things of becoming an American citizen is that I will do my best in my ability to serve this country and both Venezuela as well. So that would be a way for running, but if I have the chance to run for governor, I will totally seize that sometime.
All right, and I have a quick question real quick for them. So, especially regarding to what Joe Biden did, his very first day in office, that he decided to stop the Keystone Pipeline, to make America energy dependent of foreign nations. And of course, as you all saw, he asked the Saudis to lower their costs. He opened the Nord Stream pipeline, which has enabled Russia to have more power. And who knows, that could have been the driving factor, especially seeing how Biden handled the Afghanistan situation to enable Russia to go into Ukraine like they did. But now learning that the Biden administration has also asked Maduro and Venezuela for their oil imports, what are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Well, that's a huge, first of all, it's a stupid move, because if he didn't cancel the pipeline, he didn't have any need to go to a socialist dictator like Maduro, which he supposedly is against. So, but when we look at the raw numbers, the reason it's a really stupid move is because we only imported Russian oil last year by the 7%. The whole sum of the Russian oil was 7%. So if by 7% you prefer to go to a socialist dictator and trying to basically knee yourself to someone that you are putting sanctions against and asking if you can get some oil, which by the way, oil industry is completely destroyed. We barely make 800,000 barrels per day. And if the sanctions get away, we will make like 1.2 million. That's nothing compared to what the US could make if we didn't were all dependent in other countries. So I think it's a really stupid move, and it's a slap to the face to people like us, where we're escaping a country like Venezuela, and by the slimmest mistake you make, and when you are trying to go to the fireproof, trying to face the challenge that Russia is going at you, if your first reaction is going to Maduro, hell, I don't know what is going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years.
And with that being said too, and just the second question, because right now, with us paying for the oil, like if we get an importer from Venezuela, it's coming from our taxpaying dollars.
Oh yes.
Going to Venezuela. How is Maduro using that money?
Well, I think one of the things that he's going to use that money for drug trafficking, so they're going to use for human trafficking, for all those kind of crimes against humanity, buying weapons from Russia, China, to keep repression the people. That's how he spends his money. You know, one of the things that Chavez used to say is that, of course, as a human, is that he's going to rebuild back the country. He promised bridges, he promised schools, he promised hospitals, he promised all kind of things that could sound really great for our country, but there is nothing built, nothing. And they just waste the money on, of course, for repressing the people from their own wealth, and that's what happens with the taxpayer dollars, which is, of course, when Biden spoke with Maduro, he's breaking their own American promises of the international law. We're no longer recognizing this leader, this man. We're recognizing Guaidó. But the moment Biden spoke with Maduro, is that he didn't even tell Guaidó. Like during the Foreign Relations Committee, Marco Rubio, Senator Florida, asked those questions, and they told the Venezuelan ambassador in the U.S. after the meeting happened. It was a slap on the face to all of us. So I think that's what happened with the taxpayer dollars. I mean, it's going to use it for their own well-being, for just their own pretty much interests. They're going to use it for buying weapons from Russia, from China, oil from Iran, even who knows, nuclear weapons. We never know what his man is capable to do, but that's why we need to keep him in alert, especially here in America.
So the money isn't going back to the people?
No.
Maduro's the same guy too that was eating on live TV as his people are starving, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So literally just ate half of his food while all of his citizens are starving, and just opens a drawer, puts his entire plate, just closes the door. So that's who we're dealing with.
We got another question out here.
Well, it's not really a question, but it's more of a comment. Something that Venezuela didn't experience at the time that it was
Yeah.
And unfortunately, people are so afraid that they've gone along with surrendering their freedoms. And, businesses close down. People have to wear masks. I mean, the real whole 9 yards. And they're still using this fear of this virus to control us. It's not going away. So people need to stop being afraid, being more afraid of the government taking away your freedoms than being afraid of this virus, which is nearly 100% survivable.
Yeah, one of the things is interesting. Before the pandemic began in March, as well as many countries, we were planning to take the streets on March 13. Of course, everything went into lockdown, and COVID, in a certain way, felt like a ring from Maduro, like a power. Like, you know what? Oh, there is this virus. Stay everyone in their homes. No one is going to go out. You don't have the right to speak up. I was really furious one day, the moment, because I see Cuba having the courage, going in the streets and trying to overthrow and fight against the Diaz-Canel regime in Cuba. But we never did it in Venezuela at that period of time. Like, what's going on? If Cuba is going on the streets and has way worse healthcare, way worse humanitarian conditions, why not Venezuela? So that's the problem. Fear controls the population. Fear controls the masses, and that's why in America we never should be afraid. We need to be afraid of big government. That's the only fear that we need to.
I got a personal question for the two of you, and then I just have one other question. How long have you been in the United States, both of you?
I've been here 3 years.
3 years?
I have been here for 7 years, closely, yes.
Okay. My other question is just about Venezuela, and no disrespect. So the people that lived along the water, they were not allowed to fish and get some food or anything like that?
So,
Or they control that too?
well, they control everything, and especially the fish industry. What we have to understand is that in Venezuela we don't have a private industry, right? So all especially fish, because that's a strategical resource that's controlled by the government. So you fish when they want you to fish, and if you fish without the permission, it's basically a black market. So you have to, find your way to hide your stuff or whatever. And they basically, it's like, and if, let's say you fish, 100 fishes a day, you have to give a percentage of that to the government. And the colectivos, you remember the guys that I showed you, there's also something called vacuums. So let's say that you end up with 40 fish for yourself, but later at night they're gonna knock on your door and say, hey, if you want us to protect you from the bad guys, which they are the bad guys, but they don't say that, you need to give us 50% of your earnings. So you have so many obstacles to trying to, get a living and trying to build something that you have this feature, and then they just go through the flow and do whatever the government tells them, because you don't have other means. We go with the same comment that Simone was doing. We don't have guns in Venezuela. We don't have weapons. We don't have the military with us. We don't have the police officers with us. You don't have to fight against the police. You have to fight against the military. You have to fight against the paramilitary from Colombia, the paramilitary from Iran, because we have Hezbollah in Venezuela. They are basically the ring of security from Maduro. You have to face the Cuban intelligence. So you have a whole industry of criminals in Venezuela, which make it really hard to just do a protest and get it out of power. And you need way more firepower than that. So what can a fisherman do? Just go with the flow in the river. That's the only thing they can do, because the other option is trying to escape and face all the dangers you have to face by leaving Venezuela. That, if we think that the border between Mexico and the US is heavy and it's really bad, the border between Colombia and Venezuela can be as heavy as that, and also between Colombia and Panama, if you want to make all the trip here. There is many things that go in the mind of someone in Venezuela, escaping, not escaping, just going through the flow, and you end up just like, well, I'm just going to take what it is and go do whatever the government wants me to do, because at least I can be alive. So it's a really sad situation that anyone has to fail there.
I have a question. Coming from Ecuador, South America, my country lived under 14 years under a socialist regime, and we just elected a Democratic president last couple of years, and it's going to take many, many years for our country to recover from these 14 years that this so-called liberal, he was a libertador, how we call it in Spanish, Maduro like Chavez. And the same thing happened. We believe it, we trust it. And 14 years of literally nothing. Of more poverty, more, I mean, it was a horrible situation. We just, like I said, elected, and it's going to take many, many years. At least we got out. But it's going to be forever before we actually can build up again where our country, my country was.
Yeah.
It's not going to be easy.
You know, the fight for freedom is a generational struggle. It will take decades. It could be even take a century to go back the ways they were. You know, it's heartbreaking. You know, because you know people can say that. Well, maybe what if Maduro is overthrown tomorrow? Well, what happens next is not flowers or rainbows or prosperity. No, it's going to take way more years to educate, way more years to think the way they are, because 95% of the people are malnourished. They don't have the medical resources. They're dying on the beds right now, even if they have COVID or not. Like they're just dying, and it will take centuries. Well, not centuries, but way more decades to bring at least a progress for going back to a decent country. So I think that even though I wish I could have maybe the solutions for a better tomorrow or something, I mean, it's just we can afford a grain of wheat, a seed, in the name of freedom. And that's why we need everyone to keep engaging, to keep voting for the right leaders, and of course protecting and forming like civic groups. You know, writing for the press as well is great.
Yeah. And actually, you just brought something up too. We talk about the importance of the press. Like you brought too, with Washington Post, how much they change things. Just to give you all something else, just came to mind, so sorry to sidetrack, but the Build Back Better agenda. Remember they had that big, that 3 point, I think it was like 3.8, it was nearly $4 trillion reconciliation package that they were trying to push through earlier this year. And luckily it failed. Luckily, Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin struck it down. But tucked within that bill, they had a small snippet in there that came to giving a subsidy to the newspaper industry. And their reasoning for it was, and I get it because I've talked to many friends who work with the Bayonet and Southern Maryland Enterprise and all those. You have a lot of them who've lost money over the years because what's happened is much more of an antitrust issue with big media, social media, and big government too. So you have the small companies like the Bayonet, they'll write an article locally. And what happens is like someone like the New York Times or the Washington Post, they'll take their article, credit that individual, slap it on their website with their ads that they're getting money and revenue from, and then Google is promoting those stories first. So Washington Post is making money off articles from the smaller companies, that's why there's so many smaller news organizations that have gone under over the years, because they're losing money. So it's an antitrust issue. But what they've done in that reconciliation bill, they tried sneaking through, which Standing Order was all for. Luckily it failed. But they had the tenacity to push this through to say, all right, well, we want to give credit, a tax credit to these smaller news companies who they deemed, I think it was as small as 150 employees. They can also have a correspondent from one of the big mainstream media outlets, legacy media. So somebody from CNN could have been working for, I'm going to say for example, the Bayonet, this isn't true, but just for example, you could have somebody from CNN working for the Bayonet, having up to 150 employees, and they get $12,000 per employee of tax dollars to go to help bail them out. Which, they're trying to help them out, but here's the kicker. They have reallocated the power, and it's said in there, to determine who is a legitimate media company or news company to receive these tax credits. They're put that on the behest of the IRS. And the IRS would have been the determining factor of who is legitimate media to receive this funding. And then meanwhile, so that the first thing came, like you want to look at the government, the state, overtaking an industry. Because if you all remember recently, who was it that saved Kyle Rittenhouse in the situation that he was in? It was independent media. It was independent media. It was two journalists, Drew Hernandez and the other individual. But it was their camera work.
Elijah Schaffer.
Yeah, Elijah Schaffer, yeah. If it wasn't for them, you saw the media painted Kyle Rittenhouse. But if it wasn't for the independent media, and that's who the government's trying to get out of our system right now. So, again, the writing's on the wall. It's there now, where we see these things trying to slip through under law within our government. So, yeah, Bernadette.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that Blaze Media wrote the story that DHS was in charge of paying the media to only write positive stories on the COVID vaccine. So they do want total control of the media.
Any other questions?
I wanted to add something to them on, planting a seed. I think I've been through the college system. I just graduated recently, and I can tell you everything they've said is going on in our colleges right now. Everything that you've seen on the media about how they're indoctrinating kids, I don't like to use that word, but unfortunately that's what's happening. It's true. It's going on right now. I can tell you stories, as I've told several of you here. And I think to plant the seed, to fight this, talk to your kids about this stuff. Show them their videos, show them Instagram posts, show them things you see on Facebook. But talk to kids that you know, and do it in a way that you think you know your kids best. So I think that's the best way to start kind of pushing us towards a better future. Is you've got to inform kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're listening to you.
Cool. All right. Well, again, thank you. Oh, Deb too. Sorry, I was naming local candidates. Deb as well. Thank you. So, but again, thank you all so much for taking your time this afternoon. Like I said, I didn't speak as much because their stories alone is if you're not aware now for the cusp of where we are as a country to lose our individual rights and freedoms. You take a look everywhere throughout the country, like Canada, Australia, even in Ukraine situation where they had no Second Amendment rights, they're invaded, and then now they're like, oh, we'll give the citizens weapons so they can protect themselves. That's why they're here, and that's why it's so important that we continue to maintain those for generations to come. So, oh, sorry, one more question.
I have a question about what kind of election systems did you have in Venezuela before 1992? What kind of election system did you have in the 70s and 80s? And how did that change? How did all that?
Well, we have a decent electoral system, pretty much. We didn't have like a electoral college per se, but it was just based on the popular vote that we have. So, but when everything changed, when Chavez came to power and nationalized and add the electoral council into like a branch of government, like I'm going to control the electoral council, like if I'm saying I'm going to control the electoral college, so they become cheating, they're throwing ballots, they pretty much sending military groups in the precincts and intimidating people. So that's how everything changed. And of course, we have electoral issue in 2013 in the first election against Maduro. Enrique Capriles, one candidate at the position, won like 10% more. Yeah, like he won like 10% more than Maduro, and still they recognize Maduro as a winner. So, and Maduro controls when the elections are being. So in 2018, apparently we had an election cycle, presidential election, and no one participated. We told everyone, do not participate in fraudulent elections. Some people did it, still the loyalist of Maduro, but we have a fake kind of like opposition, like a rhino per se, as a candidate, and no one participated, so that's why we elected Juan Guaidó as legitimate leader of the National Assembly. So,
just a quick comment. Venezuela only had 40 years of democracy in the overall 200 years of history. That was between the 60s and when Chavez won. So we never had a culture of democracy in our country with the treasuring the vote and everything that goes along with that. So that was the biggest problem of how someone like Chavez managed to kidnap the country. And that's why I have so much trust in the US, because you have 200 years of democracy, 200 years of actually having institutions that work. We didn't in Venezuela. So that's my biggest faith, that the US has institutions, and by institutions I don't mean the Capitol and the Supreme Court, I mean you, everyone in the country, the citizens. That's the biggest institutions that a country can have. We unfortunately didn't have that citizen culture in Venezuela, and that's what eventually caught us and allowed someone like Chavez to win. So that gives me the faith in the US that shouldn't happen here. I hope so. Thank you.
Let's give him another round of applause.
And I was curious, Venezuela with the banking system, you know, you want to get loans and you have accounts, what happened to the banking system? Like what they're doing here with like ESG, the global,
Yeah.
what they want to do is like conform to your climate agenda, what you're part of, and do all these ratings with loans. So I'm curious what happened with the banking system and when you own private money.
Well, most of the banks are totally bankrupt nowadays, and the government system apparently nowadays.
That's what I'm curious.
Nowadays it's an illegal dollarization. People using to use dollars, as Andres mentioned, but they don't have like resources. Sometimes banks take a lot of possession. If you want to make a transaction for a certain amount of money, the banks like takes more of the transactions, like a banking tax per se. You know what I mean? So it's totally bankrupt. There is not a decent economic or financial system in Venezuela. There is no unstable system.
Yeah, like, you know, that's my curiosity. Where the system's going in our here, banking systems, where they're headed with the whole global economy.
Yeah, we don't have a private banking system in Venezuela. We used to.
So if you did have it all, just
Yeah, we'll be there, but we don't. So yeah, the government has access to every bank in the country, and the ones that were private, they confiscated the ones that were private. So we don't have, and the only ones that are called private, they actually have a partnership with the government, so we don't have private banks, and that makes, I mean, it makes everything terrible. The government has the control of your savings and everything.
that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you guys again. So, do you mind if I get a photo with you guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that lens good or do we use the other one?
I can use the other one. We good recording?
Yeah, you can.